In the forgotten corners of St. Andrew's Hospital, where old medical books gather dust and footsteps echo through empty hallways, 8-year-old Clara Wells spent her days invisible to everyone who mattered. The daughter of a janitor, she had learned to move through the hospital like a ghost, watching, listening, understanding things that even the doctors missed. Before Clara's story unfolds, tell us, where are you watching from today? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. This is the story of October 15th, when everything began at St. Andrew's Hospital. The morning started like any other in Richmond, Virginia. Clara sat cross-legged on the cold linoleum floor of the 8th floor, a forgotten wing where broken wheelchairs and outdated equipment went to die. Her small fingers traced the pages of a discarded medical textbook, Advanced Pharmacology, 3rd edition, while the chaos of the hospital floors below seemed a world away. The 8th floor had become Clara's sanctuary over the past 3 years. Most staff avoided it entirely, considering it nothing more than a storage space for medical equipment too old to use but too expensive to throw away. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across walls lined with outdated heart monitors and wheelchairs missing essential parts. But Clara loved it here. The silence allowed her to think, to process everything she observed during her daily wanderings through the hospital. She had claimed a small corner near the tall windows that overlooked the courtyard, where she kept her growing collection of discarded medical books, nursing manuals, and pharmaceutical guides that Dr. Morrison regularly threw out when new editions arrived. Her notebook, a simple composition book with a black and white marbled cover, lay open beside her, filled with observations written in her careful 8-year-old handwriting. Today's entry began. Mrs. Hendricks in 423 keeps scratching her arm where the IV goes in. Nurse Jackson says it's normal, but the textbook says constant scratching could mean infiltration or phlebitis. Clara had been making these observations for months, quietly documenting discrepancies between what she read in medical texts and what she witnessed in the hospital corridors. She never showed her notes to anyone. Who would believe the daughter of a janitor had insights worth considering? But something was wrong today. She could feel it. The feeling had started the moment she'd arrived at the hospital that morning. Her mother, Maria Wells, had brought her early because of a staffing shortage in the housekeeping department. While Maria worked the overnight shift, Clara had positioned herself in her usual corner and tried to lose herself in a chapter about drug interactions and adverse reactions. The unease grew stronger as the morning progressed. It wasn't anything she could pinpoint, just a sense that something in the hospital's rhythm was off. The nurses seemed more tense, the doctors more hurried. Even the ambient sounds felt different, charged with an urgency that made Clara's stomach clench. Room 847 had been quiet for too long. Mr. Patterson, the elderly man with kind eyes who always waved at her when she passed, hadn't made a sound in hours. Clara had walked past his room 3 times during her morning rounds, and each time the silence had grown more ominous. Mr. Patterson wasn't just any patient to Clara. Over the past 2 weeks, he had become one of the few adults in the hospital who acknowledged her existence. He would smile when she passed his room, sometimes calling out, "There's my little scholar," when he saw her carrying her medical books. He had even asked her once what she was reading, listening with genuine interest as she explained the difference between bacterial and viral infections. The machines that usually beeped steadily were now screaming in urgent, rapid bursts that echoed down the hallway. Clara closed her book and padded silently down the hallway in her worn sneakers, her heart pounding with each step. The closer she got to room 847, the more intense the alarm sounds became. Other patients were beginning to stir, poking their heads out of doorways to see what was causing the commotion. What she saw through the partially open door made her stomach drop. Dr. Harrison, the head of internal medicine, stood over Mr. Patterson's bed with two residents, flanking him like soldiers. Dr. Harrison was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that made nurses straighten their postures when he entered a room. Clara had observed him countless times during her 3 years at the hospital, noting how other medical staff deferred to his every word. The patient's breathing was labored, his face flushed red, and his hands were shaking uncontrollably. The heart monitor showed an irregular rhythm that made Clara's chest tighten with worry. Mr. Patterson's kind eyes were now wide with fear and confusion, darting between the doctors as if pleading for answers. "His condition is deteriorating rapidly," Dr. Harrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years in medicine. "We've tried everything, adjusted the dosage, added supplementary treatments, increased monitoring. Nothing's working." Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the residents, checked the medication chart with increasing concern. Clara had watched Dr. Chen during previous hospital visits and had always been impressed by her thorough approach to patient care. Unlike some of the other residents who seemed more focused on impressing Dr. Harrison than caring for patients, Dr. Chen always took time to actually listen to what patients were saying. "Should we consider transferring him to intensive care?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice steady, but Clara caught the tremor of uncertainty beneath it. "Not yet," Dr. Harrison replied, adjusting his glasses with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong about a medical decision. "Sometimes patients need time to respond to treatment. We'll give this current protocol another hour." But Clara noticed something the doctors didn't. The medication chart at the foot of the bed was thick with yellow, sticky notes and amendments. Too many changes, too quickly. Clara had read enough case studies to know that when doctors started making rapid adjustments to treatment plans, it usually meant they were unsure of the diagnosis, or worse, that their initial treatment wasn't working. And there, barely visible beneath a newer label, was something that made her blood run cold. A small red sticker, the kind the hospital used for severe allergies. Clara had learned about the hospital's color-coding system during her first year wandering the corridors. Red stickers meant severe, life-threatening allergies. Yellow stickers indicated mild allergies or sensitivities. Green stickers marked patients who were safe for all standard medications. It was a simple system, designed to prevent exactly the kind of mistake she feared was happening right now. She crept closer, pressing herself against the doorframe. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The red sticker was partially covered by a newer medication label, but she could make out the letters. "Severe penicillin allergy. Do not administer." Clara's eyes darted to the IV bag hanging beside Mr. Patterson's bed. The medication label was turned away from her view, but based on Mr. Patterson's symptoms and her extensive reading about allergic reactions, she was beginning to understand what was happening. They were killing him with kindness. The third person in the room was Dr. James Morton, a resident in his first year at St. Andrews. Clara had observed that Dr. Morton was brilliant but nervous, often second-guessing himself when working under Dr. Harrison's supervision. He stood slightly behind the others, occasionally glancing at his tablet, as if searching for answers in the digital records. "Doctor, his blood pressure is dropping," Dr. Morton observed, his voice tight with concern. "And look at this rash developing on his arms." Dr. Harrison barely glanced at the rash, probably stress-related. Elderly patients often develop skin reactions when they're anxious about their condition. But Clara had read about that exact type of rash in her pharmacology textbook. It wasn't stress-related at all. It was one of the early signs of a severe allergic reaction, often appearing before the more obvious symptoms like breathing difficulties and cardiac irregularities. "Doctor, should we consider transferring him to intensive care?" Dr. Chen asked again, her voice more urgent this time. "Not yet," Dr. Harrison replied, but Clara noticed a slight hesitation in his voice. Let's give this current treatment plan another hour. Sometimes patients need time to respond. Another hour. Clara's stomach twisted. Mr. Patterson didn't have another hour. She watched as Mr. Patterson tried to speak, his lips moving weakly as he attempted to get the doctor's attention, but the words came out as barely audible whispers, lost beneath the sound of medical equipment and professional discussion. I feel wrong, Mr. Patterson managed to say. That's normal, Dr. A. Harrison assured him with the kind of bedside manner that was meant to be comforting but came across as dismissive. You're fighting an infection, and the medication is working hard to help your body heal. The discomfort should pass soon. But Clara could see that Mr. Patterson's discomfort was actually terror. His eyes held the look of someone who knew something was desperately wrong but couldn't make anyone understand. She had seen that same look in her mother's eyes when Maria tried to explain to supervisors that certain cleaning chemicals were making her sick, only to be told that she was being overly sensitive. Clara stepped back from the doorway, her mind racing. What could an 8-year-old do? Who would listen to the janitor's daughter? Her mother, Maria, was probably 3 floors down, mopping the emergency department, unaware that her daughter was about to do something that would change everything. Clara Wells had worked at St. Andrew's Hospital for 3 years, ever since Clara's father had left them with nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. Maria was a proud woman who took her work seriously, arriving early and staying late to ensure that every room under her care was spotless. She had taught Clara to be invisible in the hospital, to never bother the important people who worked there, to stay out of the way and be grateful for the opportunity to exist in their world. But as Clara watched Mr. Patterson's struggle for each breath, she made a decision that would haunt and define her forever. She walked into that room. "Excuse me," she said softly. The 3 doctors turned as one, their faces displaying identical expressions of surprise and mild annoyance. Dr. Harrison frowned, clearly wondering how a child had wandered onto his floor unattended. The hospital had strict policies about children in patient areas, and Dr. Harrison was known for his adherence to protocol. "Little girl, you can't be in here," Dr. Chen said kindly but firmly. "This is a restricted area. Where are your parents?" Clara's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the sterile room. "He's allergic to penicillin." Dr. Harrison let out a small laugh, not cruel but dismissive in the way adults often are when children try to participate in grown-up conversations. "Sweetie, we're aware of all his allergies. We've checked everything twice. Now you need to find your parent and—" "It's covered up," Clara interrupted, pointing to the foot of the bed. "The red sticker. Someone put another label over it." For the first time, doubt flickered across Dr. Harrison's face. He glanced at the chart, then back at Clara. In his 20 years of practice, he had never been corrected by a child, and the very suggestion seemed absurd. "That's impossible. We follow strict protocols. Every allergy is documented and cross-referenced." But Dr. Chen was already moving toward the bed, her face pale. Clara watched as the young doctor's training took over, the part of medical education that emphasized checking and double-checking everything, especially when a patient's condition was deteriorating unexpectedly. Dr. Chen lifted the medication chart and began peeling back the layers of labels and sticky notes. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and Clara could see the growing concern in her eyes. The room fell silent except for the increasingly urgent beeping of Mr. Patterson's monitors. "There," Clara said quietly, pointing to what Dr. Chen had uncovered. The red allergy sticker, clear as day. "Severe penicillin allergy, documented 10/03/2024. The room fell silent, except for the beeping of machines and Mr. Patterson's labored breathing. Dr. Chen's voice was barely audible. "We've been giving him ampicillin for 3 days. It's a penicillin derivative." The realization hit Dr. Harrison like a physical blow. His face went white, then red, then white again. Clara watched as 20 years of medical confidence crumbled in an instant. "Stop the IV. Now, get me 50 milliliters of diphenhydramine and prepare for potential anaphylactic shock protocol." Dr. Morton was already moving, his nervous energy suddenly channeled into life-saving action. "Should I call for the crash cart?" "Yes," Dr. Harrison said, his voice hollow, "and get respiratory therapy up here immediately." The next few minutes were a blur of medical terminology and urgent activity. Nurses appeared as if from nowhere, summoned by the code blue alarm that Dr. Chen had triggered. Equipment was wheeled in. Medications were prepared and administered with the precision of a Formula One pit crew. Clara stood in the corner, forgotten again, watching as the adults did what adults do, fixed the problem without acknowledging what had caused it. But she saw everything. The way Dr. Chen's hands shook as she prepared the antihistamine. The way Dr. Harrison kept glancing at the chart as if he could make the red sticker disappear. The way the nurses worked with quiet efficiency, never meeting anyone's eyes, understanding without being told that a serious mistake had been made. Nurse Rebecca Martinez, a 15-year veteran of St. Andrews, arrived with the crash cart. Clara had observed Rebecca many times during her hospital visits and had always been impressed by her calm competence in crisis situations. Rebecca took in the scene immediately, the covered allergy sticker, the flushed patient, the guilty expressions on the doctors' faces. "How long has he been on the ampicillin?" Rebecca asked, her voice professional but with an edge that suggested she already suspected the answer. 3 days, Dr. Chen admitted. Rebecca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Clara noticed the subtle reaction because she had learned to read the micro-expressions that adults thought children couldn't see. Rebecca had seen this kind of mistake before, and she knew exactly how close Mr. Patterson had come to dying. Most importantly, she saw Mr. Patterson's breathing begin to steady. His face returned to its normal color, the irregular heart rhythm smoothed into something that looked almost normal. 20 minutes later, Mr. Patterson opened his eyes. "Water!" he croaked, and Dr. Chen nearly cried with relief. The crisis was over. A life had been saved, and nobody said a word to the 8-year-old girl who had made it all possible. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure and authority. The commanding presence that usually filled any room he entered seemed diminished, as if the admission of error had somehow made him physically smaller. "Well, that was a close call. Good catch on the allergy documentation, Dr. Chen." Dr. Chen opened her mouth as if to say something, glanced at Clara, then closed it again. Clara could see the internal struggle playing out on the young doctor's face. The desire to give credit where it was due, battling against the understanding that contradicting Dr. Harrison could have serious consequences for her career. "Yes, sir," Dr. Chen said finally. "Just careful observation." Clara felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same feeling she got when she watched her mother clean up after people who pretended she didn't exist. The feeling of being right, being helpful, being necessary, and being completely invisible. She turned to leave, but Mr. Patterson's weak voice stopped her. "Little angel," he whispered, his eyes focusing on her with difficulty. "You were here, weren't you, before they fixed me?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Thank you," he said simply. Dr. Harrison looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Patterson, you should rest. The medication reaction caused some confusion. You might not remember everything clearly." But Mr. Patterson's eyes never left Clara's face. "I remember enough." The elderly man's gratitude was quiet, but unmistakable. Clara could see in his eyes that he understood exactly what had happened, regardless of what the official record would say. He knew that a little girl had saved his life when the doctors hadn't even realized it was in danger. Clara walked out of that room carrying a weight she was too young to understand. She had saved a life. She had proved that intelligence and observation mattered more than degrees and authority. She had done something that would have made her father proud if she had ever known him, and not a single person in a position of power would ever acknowledge it. She climbed the stairs back to the 8th floor, her sanctuary of dust and discarded dreams. The medical textbook lay open where she had left it, the page still turned to allergic reactions and cross-sensitivities. Renim. She had read that chapter 6 times, memorizing every detail about how medications could turn from healing to deadly in the wrong circumstances. The 8th floor felt different now. What had once been simply a quiet place to read and think had become something more significant, a place where important observations were made, where critical thinking happened away from the politics and hierarchies of the floors below. Clara sat down and opened her notebook, the composition book that had become her most treasured possession. She wrote, October 15th, Mr. Patterson, room 847. Severe penicillin allergy missed due to covered documentation. Received ampicillin for 3 days, causing severe allergic reaction. Doctors didn't see red sticker until I pointed it out. Patient stable after antihistamine treatment and protocol change. She paused, then added, Nobody listened until it was almost too late. Dr. Harrison won't admit I helped. Dr. Chen wanted to but couldn't. Only Mr. Patterson said thank you. But someone had been listening. Nurse Rebecca Martinez had watched the entire scene from the hallway, having arrived just as Clara entered the room. Rebecca was a 15-year veteran of St. Andrews, a woman who had seen enough medical mistakes to know the difference between luck and observation. She found Clara on the 8th floor an hour later. You read medical books, Rebecca said. It wasn't a question. Clara looked up from her notebook, wary. Adults who sought her out usually wanted to tell her she was somewhere she shouldn't be. I found them, Clara said carefully. They were being thrown away. Rebecca sat down on the floor beside her, something that no adult had ever done before. Her scrubs rustled against the linoleum, and Clara noticed that Rebecca moved with the careful economy of someone who had spent years on her feet, caring for people who often couldn't care for themselves. What else do you read? Everything. Pharmacology, diagnostic manuals, case studies. Dr. Morrison throws them out when he gets new editions. Sometimes I find nursing journals in the break room trash cans. And you understand them? Clara nodded. Most of them. The words, I don't know. I look up in the medical dictionary in the reference section of the library downtown. Mama takes me there on Saturdays. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. In her 15 years at St. Andrews, she had never encountered anything quite like Clara Wells. The hospital was full of bright people, doctors, residents, medical students, but they all came to their knowledge through formal channels, expensive educations, and structured learning environments. Clara had taught herself medicine from discarded textbooks and sheer determination. How long have you been coming here? Since I was 5. When Mama started working here, she brings me after school and during summer break. I stay out of the way. What you did today, Rebecca began, then stopped. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that she had just saved a man's life while making 3 doctors look incompetent? How do you tell a child that the medical establishment she had just corrected would never thank her for it? I know I'm not supposed to talk to doctors, Clara said quietly, but he was going to die. Yes, Rebecca said simply. He was. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who understood that sometimes the most important truths were the ones nobody wanted to hear. Around them, the eighth floor settled into its usual quiet, dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. "Clara," Rebecca said finally, "I want you to know something. What you did today was not luck. It wasn't a coincidence. You saw something that trained medical professionals missed, and you had the courage to speak up. That's not normal for someone your age. It's not normal for someone any age." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying was something she had learned not to do in the hospital. It made adults uncomfortable and drew the wrong kind of attention. "Will Dr. Harrison be mad at me?" "Dr. Harrison will never speak of this again," Rebecca said with certainty. "Men like him don't admit when they're wrong, especially when they're corrected by someone they think is beneath them." The harsh truth of this statement hung in the air between them. Clara was beginning to understand that the hospital, like the world outside it, operated according to unspoken rules about whose opinions mattered and whose didn't. "But Mr. Patterson is okay. Mr. Patterson is okay because of you." Rebecca stood up, her knees creaking slightly. "I'm going to keep an eye on you, Clara Wells, and I'm going to make sure that when you see something important, someone listens." She walked away, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and her notebook. The eighth floor was quiet again, filled with the comforting presence of discarded medical equipment and forgotten dreams. But something fundamental had changed in that space. It was no longer just a hiding place for a janitor's daughter. It had become a place where life and death observations were made. Clara picked up her medical textbook and continued reading about allergic reactions. She had a feeling she would need to know everything she could learn. 3 floors below, Dr. Harrison was completing his incident report in his office, a space that reflected his status in the hospital hierarchy. Medical diplomas and awards covered the walls, and his desk was positioned to give him a commanding view of anyone who entered. But today, the trappings of authority felt hollow. "Patient experienced delayed allergic reaction to prescribed medication due to documentation error," he typed. "Reaction was caught early and treated appropriately. Patient stable. No lasting effects anticipated." He stared at the screen for a long moment, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The official version of events was clean, professional, and completely false. There had been no early catch. The reaction had been caught by an 8-year-old girl after 3 days of increasingly dangerous symptoms. He did not mention the 8-year-old girl who had saved a man's life. But in room 847, Mr. Patterson was telling his wife about the little angel who had appeared just when he needed her most. His wife, Helen, listened with the kind of attention that comes from nearly 50 years of marriage, understanding that her husband was trying to tell her something important. "She was so small," Mr. Patterson said, his voice still weak but growing stronger. "But she saw what they couldn't see. If she hadn't spoken up—" Helen Patterson squeezed her husband's hand, her own eyes filling with tears. "What was her name?" "I don't know, but she saved my life." And in the nurses' station, Rebecca Martinez was making a note in her personal log, a journal she had kept throughout her nursing career to document the human stories that never made it into official medical records. Clara Wells, 8 years old, exceptional observational skills. Watch carefully. The sun was setting over Richmond as Clara's mother finished her shift and came to collect her daughter. Maria Wells found Clara exactly where she always did, on the 8th floor, surrounded by medical books and quiet determination. Maria was a small woman with calloused hands and tired eyes, but she carried herself with dignity despite the physical demands of her job. She had learned to navigate the hospital's complex social hierarchy, understanding exactly where she fit in the pecking order and how to avoid drawing unwanted attention to herself or her daughter. "How was your day, Mija?" Maria asked, as she did every day. "I learned something new," Clara replied, as she did every day. But today was different. Today, Clara had learned that knowledge was power, but only if you had the courage to use it. She had learned that being right wasn't enough. You had to be brave enough to speak up, even when nobody wanted to listen. Most importantly, she had learned that in the forgotten corners of the world, the invisible observers sometimes saw the most clearly of all. As they walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, Clara noticed everything with new eyes. The way the residents hurried past without making eye contact, the way the attending physicians spoke over the nurses as if they weren't there, the way the cleaning staff worked around the medical staff like choreographed dancers avoiding collision. She saw the hierarchy, the invisible walls, the unspoken rules that determined whose voice mattered and whose didn't. And she began to understand that what had happened today was just the beginning. The 8th floor of St. Andrew's Hospital remained quiet as the night shift took over. In the abandoned rooms and forgotten hallways, dust settled on outdated equipment and discarded dreams. But something had changed in that space. An 8-year-old girl had proven that intelligence and compassion could triumph over arrogance and assumption. Tomorrow, Clara would return with her notebook and her determination. She would read more books, observe more carefully, and wait for the next moment when her voice might mean the difference between life and death. Because in every hospital, in every city, in every country around the world, there are invisible observers like Clara Wells, people who see what others miss, who understand what others ignore, who care when others are too busy to notice. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, they find the courage to speak up. The story of Clara Wells was just beginning. But already, in the quiet corners of St. Andrew's Hospital, whispers were starting to spread about the janitor's daughter, who saw things that even doctors missed. And in room 847, Mr. Patterson slept peacefully, alive because an 8-year-old girl refused to stay silent when it mattered most. If you want to see what happens next in Clara's story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Because this is just the beginning of the 8th floor, and Clara Wells has many more lives to save.